What's a small reason you ended a long relationship? His name was Kieran, and when I met him, he was finishing school and working part-time at a warehouse. He had plans, project management, maybe a certificate from the community college down the road. He was sweet and he tried hard, and I thought we were building something. He took me to a diner on our third date and apologized because it was the only place he could afford that week, and I told him I didn't care, that I liked diners, that I had eaten cereal for dinner half the nights of my life. He laughed and held the door open for me, and I thought, yes, this one. We moved in after a year. I was working full-time as an office coordinator at a physical therapy clinic. I paid first month's rent and the deposit because Kieran said he was between checks. I figured it was temporary. It was not temporary. Within 3 months, I was paying rent, electric, internet, and groceries. Kieran quit the warehouse because his manager was disrespectful. He said he would apply elsewhere. I never once saw him fill out an application. What I saw was him on the couch playing games at 2 in the afternoon with dishes piled in the sink from the night before. I asked him to do the dishes. He said he would get to it. I came home 8 hours later, and they were still there with sauce dried onto the plates. So hard I had to soak them for 40 minutes before they would scrub clean. That became the routine. I asked, he agreed, nothing happened. I did it myself because I couldn't live in filth. He watched me do it every single time and never once got up to help. I asked him to take the trash out on Tuesdays for pickup day. He forgot almost every week. I would come home to the bin still sitting by the counter and the truck already gone. So I started doing it myself at 6 in the morning before work, while he was still asleep, hauling 2 bags down 3 flights of stairs in the dark. He never noticed. After about a year, I told him we needed to talk about money because I was covering everything, and my savings account had not moved in 9 months. He said he was going through a tough time and I should be more supportive. I asked him what the tough time was. He said he was stressed. I asked what was stressing him. He said I wouldn't understand. I was working 45 hours a week, paying every bill, coming home to a dirty apartment, cooking because if I didn't, we didn't eat, doing all the laundry because the one time he tried it, he shrank 3 of my work shirts and told me they were probably already that size. But he was the one going through a tough time. His mom called me once to thank me for taking such good care of her son. She said Kieran had always needed someone to keep him on track. She said it like a compliment, like I should be proud that I was his second mother at 27 years old. I started dreading going home, not because anything terrible was waiting, just because I knew exactly what I would walk into. Him on the couch, something on the TV, wrappers on the coffee table, the same dent on the same cushion in the same spot where he had been sitting when I left that morning, like he had not stood up the entire 8 hours. And the first thing he said to me every day was, "What's for dinner?" Not "How was your day?" Not "Hey, I missed you." "What's for dinner?" Every single day. My coworker Lena asked me one afternoon why I looked so tired all the time. I told her I was running a household by myself while working full-time. She asked what Kieran did all day. I opened my mouth to answer and I realized I didn't actually know. I had no idea what he did for 8 hours while I was gone. I just knew it didn't include cleaning, cooking, applying for jobs, or anything that made our life easier. One night I came home and there was a single coffee mug on the counter with the spoon still in it and a ring of dried coffee underneath, and I knew without checking that it had been there since the morning. He had made coffee, drunk it, set the mug down, and walked away from it for 10 hours. 10 hours of him stepping around it, sitting near it, watching shows 2 feet from it, and never once moving his hand the 8 inches it would have taken to put it in the sink. I stood there looking at that mug, and I felt something in me get very still. Not angry, not sad, just still, like a switch I had not known was on had clicked off. The thing that broke something in me was my birthday. I didn't expect anything big. I just wanted him to acknowledge it. Maybe cook for once. Maybe get me a card. He didn't do any of that. What he did was ask me if I could pick up food on my way home because he forgot to eat lunch and he was starving. On my birthday, I picked up the food. I came home. He ate it on the couch and asked if I wanted to watch something. He didn't say happy birthday. He didn't say it the day before. He didn't say it the day after. 2 weeks later, I had a vet appointment for our dog Coda. I was stuck in a meeting that ran late, so I called Kieran at 3 and asked him to pick Coda up by 5 because the clinic closed at 5:30. He said no problem. At 5:15, the vet's office called me. Nobody had come for Coda. I called Kieran. He said he lost track of time. I left work, drove across town in traffic, and made it there at 5:25. Coda was sitting in his crate by the front desk just waiting, his tail thumping the metal floor of the crate when he saw me, like he had been thumping it at every single person who walked in for the last hour. The receptionist gave me this look like she felt sorry for me, and I realized that's the same look Lena gave me every day at work. When I got home, Kieran was on the couch. He said, "Sorry, babe, I got caught up." I put Coda's leash down. I looked at him and told him I was done. He stared at me like I had just said something in a different language. The first thing out of his mouth was not an apology. He looked at me with a confused, almost annoyed expression and said, "You're breaking up with me over dishes?" I told him it wasn't about the dishes. He said, "Then what is it about?" I said, "It's about the fact that I live with a grown man and I feel completely alone." He didn't move for a few seconds. Then he said, "That's not fair." I almost laughed. I said, "Fair would have been you picking up Coda. Fair would have been you noticing I was falling apart while you sat on that couch every single day." He didn't have a comeback. He looked away and rubbed the back of his neck. Then his shoulders dropped. His voice got quieter. He looked at the floor and said, "I've been depressed." Just like that. 2 years of me begging him to talk to me, and he picks now to bring it up. I said, "When were you going to tell me that?" He didn't answer. I said, "In 2 years, you never once mentioned being depressed. You never looked into help. You brought it up the second I said I was leaving." He opened his mouth and closed it. I said, "That's not honesty, Kieran. That's a strategy." I told him he had 2 weeks to figure out where he was going. He nodded quietly. I went into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I expected to feel something big. All I felt was tired. The next morning, I woke up to something that made me stop in the hallway. The apartment was spotless. Every dish clean, the counter wiped down, the trash out, the shoes lined up by the door, and Kieran was at the stove, cooking. He looked up and said, "I made eggs. Yours are the ones with the peppers, right?" I just stood there. He had never once made them for me. Not on a weekend, not on my birthday, not on any random Tuesday. But here he was, the morning after I told him I was done, with a pan in his hand, and a kind of bashful little smile on his face like he was waiting for me to give him a gold star. I sat down and ate them. They were good. And I hated that they were good because it meant he had known how to do this the whole time. For 3 days, he was a different person. He cleaned without me asking. He took Coda for walks, morning and evening, and Coda kept looking back at me on his way out the door like he wasn't sure if this was real. He mentioned a job listing in warehouse logistics. He said it looked interesting. I felt a crack in my chest. Not in the breaking way, in the doubt way. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this was the version of him that had been hiding for 2 years, and he just needed a wake-up call. That thought kept me up at night, and on the 3rd day, I called Imogen. Imogen is my best friend, and she will tell you the truth even when you're not ready. I told her everything. The clean apartment, the eggs, the walks, the job listing. I told her I was wondering if I was making a mistake. There was a pause on the other end. Then she said, "So he can do all of that. He just chose not to for 2 years. That's worse, not better." I didn't say anything. She kept going. "He's showing you right now that he was always able to. He just didn't care enough until there were consequences. That's not change. That's panic." I sat with that for a long time. I thought about every single time he said he would get to it. He could have. He just didn't want to. Now that I was leaving, suddenly he wanted to. That wasn't growth. That was a performance. And I was the audience he was trying to keep in the seat. The next evening, I came home to candles on the table. Takeout plated on real dishes. He pulled a chair out for me and asked about my day. He listened. He nodded. He took my hand across the table and said, "I know I messed up, but I love you. Doesn't that count for something?" I pulled my hand back. I said, "It counted for 2 years, Kieran. It doesn't anymore." His face changed. Not the performing face. Something colder, like a door closing behind his eyes. He blew out the candle and started clearing the table without a word. The next afternoon, my phone rang. It was his mom, Liesel. Her voice came through warm and soft, the way it always did when she wanted something. She said, "Sweetheart, Kieran told me you two are having some trouble." I said, "I ended things." Long pause. Then her voice sharpened. "He said you're kicking him out over housework. Is that really what's happening?" I tried to explain. The bills, the job he quit, the cooking and cleaning. She cut me off halfway through. Every couple has rough patches. Kieran's father and I went through much worse. That's what love is. I said, "Kieran's father wasn't unemployed for 2 years while you paid for everything." The line went quiet. Then she said, "I raised my son to be sensitive. Maybe you just need someone harder." There it was. It wasn't his fault for doing nothing. It was my fault for expecting something. I said something polite and hung up. She called the next day, sweet again. She said, "You know, I think of you like a daughter." She told me how hard Kieran had it as a kid, how his dad was rough on him, how he always needed extra patience. She said she had seen how good I was for him, and that I should think about how rare that was. The day after that, her voice was flat. She said, "I hope you know you're going to regret throwing away something real over things that could have been fixed with a simple conversation." That evening, she sent me a photo. A little boy, maybe 4 or 5, with messy hair and a gap-toothed smile sitting on a porch with a juice box. The caption said, "He's always needed someone in his corner." I stared at it longer than I should have, not because it changed my mind, but because she knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't showing me her son. She was showing me a child and asking how I could possibly abandon a child. I felt that horrible, heavy feeling like maybe I was a bad person. Maybe expecting an adult man to act like an adult was asking too much. I barely slept. The next morning at work, I told Lena. All of it. The calls, the photo, the guilt. She listened the whole time and then she said, "That's not a mother-in-law. That's a manager handing you a performance review for a job you didn't apply for." I let out a sound that was half laugh and half exhale, because she was right. Liesel wasn't worried about me. She was worried about who was going to take care of Kieran next. She had been his manager his whole life, and she had outsourced the position to me, and now I was quitting and she didn't have a replacement. That was all this was. Not love, not concern, staffing. I went home and my phone buzzed twice more. I didn't open them. I typed her a short text. "I care about Kieran, but I can't be his partner and his parent. I hope he gets the help he needs." I put the phone down. A few minutes later, it buzzed. A long paragraph telling me I was selfish, that I clearly never loved her son if I could walk away this easily, that I deserved to end up alone. I read every word. I put the phone down. I didn't respond. I didn't owe her an explanation. I didn't owe her son another year of my life because she raised him to expect someone would always pick up after him. I thought that was the end of the outside pressure. But Kieran still had 9 days left and he wasn't packing. He was doing something worse. He was planting seeds with people we both knew. Imogen called me a few days later. She said, "You need to hear what Kieran's been telling people. He's saying you kicked him out with no warning during a mental health crisis. He's making it sound like you abandoned him when he needed you most." My stomach turned. She kept going. "He told someone you snapped over a forgotten vet appointment. He told another that you've been cold for months and he's been walking on eggshells. After everything I had done for that man, he was rewriting the story so he came out clean." The worst part was that some of the people hearing it didn't know any better. They were hearing his version first. Imogen pushed back when she could, but she said I needed to be the one to say it because people weren't going to take her word over Kieran's tears. The next morning, I woke to a text from Cillian. He's an old friend who knew us both from before we even started dating. He said Kieran had called him pretty upset and had nowhere to go, and could I please talk to him because he sounded really bad. I called Cillian. Before he could say anything, I said, "I need to tell you what actually happened. The full thing." He said, "Okay, I'm listening." I told him. The 2 years of paying every bill, the job Kieran quit, asking for help with the dishes and getting nothing every time, my birthday, Coda, calling Kieran at 3 to do one thing and getting that call from the vet at 5:15. Cillian was quiet through all of it. When I finished, he said, "He didn't mention any of that. He made it sound like this came out of nowhere." I said, "It didn't come out of nowhere, Cillian. It came out of 2 years of everything." He said, "I'm sorry. I should have asked you first instead of just taking his word for it." I told him it was fine. I told him I understood why he believed Kieran. Kieran was good at telling the version that made him look helpless. That was kind of his whole skill set at this point. I scrolled through through the other texts I had gotten. A friend from our old group asking if I was really throwing Kieran out. Another asking if I was okay. Another saying Kieran had reached out and he sounded really bad. Each one was a seed. So I started making calls, one by one. I didn't yell, I didn't trash him. I just told them the truth. The money, the work, the loneliness of living with someone physically there but checked out. I told each of them, I want you to have the full picture before you decide how you feel. I didn't ask anyone to pick sides. I just gave them what Kieran had left out. Most of them went quiet. That kind of quiet where you can tell someone is rethinking the whole conversation they had before they called you. A few apologized. One said, he really made it sound like you just snapped one day. I said, that's what he does. He waits until the last second and acts like everything is happening to him instead of because of him. Another one, an old friend named Vesta, who had been at our second anniversary dinner, called me back after I had already finished telling her the short version. She said, wait, he told me you stopped wanting kids and that's why he was so depressed. He told me that was the actual issue and you were using the chores stuff as a cover. I sat there on my couch with my phone pressed against my ear and I felt something in my chest go very cold. We had not talked about kids in a year. We had never talked about him being depressed about kids. He had invented a whole second story underneath the first one, a sadder one that turned me into a woman who had pulled the rug out of his life. I told Vesta the truth. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I'm sorry I believed any of it. After a few days, I felt the shift. People weren't responding to him as fast. Cillian didn't return his call. The friend who had texted me first stopped checking in with him. They quietly pulled back from his version, and Kieran noticed. I was at the counter one evening cooking when he stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and his jaw tight and said, are you telling people our business? I didn't stop what I was doing. I said, you told them first. I'm just correcting the story. His face got red, angry red. He said, you're making me look bad. I said, I'm telling people what you did. If that makes you look bad, that's not my problem. He slammed his hand down on the counter hard enough to rattle the stuff on it. I didn't flinch. A month ago, that would have scared me, but I wasn't doing that anymore. He said, I can't believe you're doing this to me. I said, you had 2 years to do something. Anything. You didn't. And now you're upset that people know. He didn't have a response. He turned around and walked out. The front door clicked shut. On the last night before he left, he sat on the couch and asked me to sit with him. I almost said no, but something about the way he asked, quiet, no angle, made me walk over. Coda jumped up between us and settled in the middle like he was holding the space between us together one last time. The TV was off. In 2 years, I had never seen him sit on that couch with the TV off. Kieran stared at the dark screen for a long time. Then he said, I want to tell you something, and I don't want you to say anything until I'm done. I nodded. He said, I knew. The whole time I knew I wasn't pulling my weight. I knew you were exhausted. I knew you were carrying everything. His voice was steady but thin, like he was reading something off a page he had memorized. I told myself that as long as you kept doing it, it meant you were okay with it. I told myself if it was really that bad, you'd say something. He paused. And then you did say something, over and over. And I still didn't change because some part of me figured you'd never actually leave. He turned his head slightly. I thought you loved me too much to go. And I used that. The words landed in my chest like stones dropping into water. I held still. I needed to hear the rest. I said, did you ever think about what it was doing to me? He said, I think I did. But I convinced myself it wasn't that serious. Like it was just nagging. Just you being particular. I told myself that's just how relationships are. One person does more. He swallowed. But I always knew which one of us was which. I just didn't want to be the one who had to change. He sat there with his hands flat on his knees, pressing into the fabric of his jeans like he was holding himself in place. He wasn't crying. He wasn't trying to look like anything. He was just sitting there with the weight of 2 years of his own choices on the couch next to him, finally heavy enough for him to feel. That was the first time in 2 years he had told me the truth. Not a version that made him look better. Not a truth wrapped in an excuse or a redirect or a guilt trip. Just the plain truth. He knew. He always knew. The question rose up in me before I decided to ask it. It had been sitting in my chest for 2 years, buried under all the other questions. The ones about dishes and bills and forgotten dogs. Those were the surface questions. Now, with the boxes packed and nothing left to protect, I let the real one out. Did you actually love me, Kieran? Or did you just love what I did for you? He opened his mouth, then he closed it. He opened it again, and his voice came out so small I barely heard it. I don't know, he said, and that's the most honest thing I've ever said to you. The room went still, not just quiet, still, like everything in the apartment. The walls, the air, the lamp in the corner, all of it just stopped moving for a second. I didn't move. He didn't move. Even Coda was still, his head heavy and warm on my thigh, and I could feel his breath slowing the way it did right before he fell asleep. 3 words that told me more than 2 years of I love you ever did. He couldn't tell the difference between loving me and loving what I did for him. And if he couldn't tell the difference, then it didn't matter which one it was, because either way I was giving everything to someone who couldn't even tell me what he was giving back. I stood up. I said, thank you for saying that. He blinked. That's it? He said, like he was waiting for something bigger. A fight, a speech, a door slamming. That's it, I said. The next morning the door clicked shut behind him. I locked the deadbolt. I fed Coda. I went to bed.